You know, when you read a quote like that, it sounds like something out of a fantasy novel. But here's the wild part. It's not. For most of our existence, Earth was actually like that, a planet with different kinds of humans walking around. They were living, competing, and, yeah, interbreeding. This isn't fantasy. It's our own real, deep, and mostly forgotten history.
So let's get right into it. What we're doing here is basically a genetic ghost hunt. We're going to be looking for the traces of these long-vanished peoples, but not in some dusty old fossil dig. Nope. We're looking for them inside our own DNA right now.
All right, first things first, let's set the scene. You have to understand, for most of our history, Homo sapiens, well, we weren't alone, not by a long shot. It was a pretty crowded planet, human-wise.
Okay, to make this real, let's look at an incredible example. Scientists have found what they think is a whole new human species. They're calling them Homo juliensis, and the nickname is basically huge head humans because, well, their skulls were massive. And get this, their brains might have actually been bigger than ours. These weren't some primitive cavemen, these were sophisticated people, making tools, surviving brutal Asian winters for ages, and then poof, they vanished.
But hold on, because this is where it starts to get messy. Not everyone is on board with this new species idea. Some of the top experts in the field are looking at these same fossils and saying, nope, this is just another example of Homo longi, also known as the dragon man. And that's the really crucial takeaway here. Just figuring out who our ancient relatives even were is a huge, ongoing scientific fight.
But look, this story isn't just about old bones and arguing scientists. It gets way more personal, because these different groups, they didn't just live near each other. We know for a fact they met. And the proof? Well, the proof of those ancient encounters is written literally in our DNA today.
Think about this for a second. If your family tree has roots outside of Africa, then somewhere between 1 and 4% of your DNA is Neanderthal. That's not a guess. It's not a theory. It's a fact. It's a direct genetic echo from tens of thousands of years ago, sitting inside you.
So the big question is, why did this ancient DNA stick around? Well, the leading idea is this really cool concept called adaptive introgression. The best way to think about it is like a biological shortcut. Imagine our ancestors, modern humans, moving out of Africa into totally new places like Europe and Asia. They meet Neanderthals, who've already been living there and adapting for hundreds of thousands of years. They already have the genetic tools to deal with the local diseases, the cold, the food. So interbreeding was like getting a genetic cheat sheet. It was a way to instantly download some of their best survival tricks.
Okay, so what were these genetic gifts? What exactly did our ancestors get that gave them such a big advantage?
Well, a huge chunk of it basically supercharged our immune systems. I mean, we're talking about genes that are critical for fighting off infections, things like toll-like receptors and the OAS antiviral response. These are the frontline soldiers of our immune system. And it turns out many of these genes are just packed with Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA. It's almost like they gave us an ancient vaccine, helping our ancestors survive all the new germs and viruses they'd never seen before.
All right, that's a really cool story, right? But how do we actually know this stuff works? I mean, how can we be sure this ancient DNA isn't just junk? You know, silent leftovers from the past. How do scientists prove that it's still actively doing something in our bodies today?
To answer that, scientists go on a hunt for something very specific, called an mVAR. Just think of it like this. It's a little piece of ancient DNA that acts like a dimmer switch for one of your genes. It can crank the gene's activity way up or dial it way down. If they can find an ancient mVAR, they've basically caught one of these genetic ghosts in the act, still flipping switches inside our cells.
So how do they find these dimmer switches? With a really clever and, yeah, kind of complicated-looking experiment. It's called a massively parallel reporter assay. Now, don't worry about the crazy name or the diagram. The basic idea is actually pretty simple. Scientists take thousands of these little snippets of ancient DNA, they hook each one up to a gene that glows like a tiny light bulb, and then they stick them into human cells. And then they just watch. If the cell grows brighter or dimmer, bingo, they know that bit of ancient DNA is an active switch.
And it worked. The results were absolutely stunning. They found 292 distinct pieces of Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA that were still actively flipping switches in our genes. And a ton of them were, you guessed it, related to our immune system. This was the smoking gun. This was the proof.
And check out this chart, because it shows this wasn't just something that happened in one place. This wasn't just a European thing. You can see these beneficial blocks of ancient DNA showing up in populations all over the world. East Asia, South Asia, you name it. This whole genetic shortcut thing, it was a key survival strategy for our ancestors. everywhere.
Okay, so with all this mixing and matching and interbreeding going on, what does our actual family tree look like? Well, the more we learn, the more it seems like tree is completely the wrong word. To try and make sense of this tangled history, geneticists have a special tool called an admixture graph. It's a way of drawing our history that's designed not just for neat little splits, but for all the messy stuff, the mergers, the genetic mixing between the branches.
And this slide really says it all. On the left, you've got the simple family tree we all probably saw in a textbook. You know, a nice clean trunk with branches splitting off. But on the right, that's the new reality. It's not a tree. It's a web. It's a tangled, messy network showing how genes flowed back and forth between all these different human groups for a very, very long time.
So why is it so darn complicated to figure out? Well, a few big reasons. First, we just don't have that much data to work with. Ancient DNA is incredibly rare. Second, the data we do have shows that this interbreeding wasn't a one-time thing. It happened over and over again in different places at different times, all while people were migrating all over the globe. It means that any picture we draw is, at best, just a rough sketch of a really chaotic past.
And get this, it gets even crazier. A recent study using some really powerful new software found something that just blew people's minds. They discovered that for any given set of genetic evidence, they could create hundreds of different, often contradictory family trees, and all of them would fit the data perfectly. So the idea that there's one single, true family tree for humanity, it's probably an illusion.
So, where does all this leave us? What are we supposed to make of all this complexity, all this uncertainty?
I love this quote. A scientist who was reviewing a paper on this stuff really nailed the feeling. He said it was like being at a cladistics meeting where people debate the significance of a particular scale on the middle toe of the lesser two-headed tree wrangler, right? The point is, the details get so incredibly specific and the arguments are so intense that the big picture can feel almost impossibly complicated.
But here's the thing. That debate, that messiness, that's not a sign that science is failing. It's the exact opposite. It's the sign that science is working perfectly. Every single new fossil, every new piece of DNA, every better computer model challenges the old ideas. It forces us to get smarter. It's complicated for sure, but every one of these arguments pushes us just a little bit closer to understanding the real story of who we are.
And what a story it is. It leaves us with a pretty deep question, doesn't it? It tells us we aren't some pure single lineage that marched cleanly through time. We are a mosaic. We are hybrids. Each of us is carrying the genetic ghosts of people who vanished from this earth tens of thousands of years ago. So, if our own DNA is a patchwork quilt woven from many ancient peoples, what does it really mean to be human?